Hey everyone, and welcome to the Courage Conversation Show. I'm your host, Ashley Easter. I'm the founder and executive director of Courage 365, and I'm so glad that you have chosen to join us tonight. We are continuing our 6-part series with Alexis Douglas. She is an anti-racist expert. She has done a lot of just amazing work in this field, and she continues to branch off and do different projects around this subject that are just super inspiring to me. If you haven't listened to our previous episodes with Alexis, make sure you go ahead and do that. You can check them out either on our YouTube channel or just go to courage365.org and click the videos tab, and you can watch the back episodes where we explain a little bit more about what we're doing. But in short, Alexis has come on and given a training to our board. She is giving coaching to me as executive director, and she is also doing this amazing thing with our community here where she is talking with us on Courage Conversations about the intersection of race and abuse and understanding how we can become a more supportive community, not just as the leaders of Courage 365, but as everybody in the community, because we believe that everybody in our community has the capacity to be a leader in the survivor movement. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and welcome Alexis back onto the show. Hey, Alexis, welcome back.
Hello. I love it here. What do you mean? Well, thanks for having me back, but I love it here.
I am so glad to hear that. You know, we were just chatting, everybody, me and Alexis before the show, and I don't know, it just makes my heart so warm to talk with you, Alexis. Like, it's fun, it's natural, and I always learn new things, and I don't know, I'm just kind of pinching myself that we have this opportunity to work together this way. So thank you again.
Me too. It's always it doesn't feel as heavy as this work is, and I want to say this on the show that so I give ally cookies, but I don't give that many. And I don't give them if you follow my work, I don't give them because sometimes in past experience it has been a you give it and then the effort stops because it's like, oh, I've
Mhm.
achieved that thing.
Right.
Um, but I don't see that from you. I don't feel that from you. So I'm gonna give this ally cookie. It is different. It's not a heavy lift. It's not a
Mm.
uh I don't have to disassociate as much.
Mm.
Or I don't know if I do it at all. I mean, some I do just because it's painful. I want to be able to talk. But I don't, it's not hard work to have to talk to you about race.
Oh.
And usually it's hard work to have to talk, in my experience. Let me be more
Mhm.
neutral. In my experience, more honest. It is difficult to talk with white people about race because they find talking about race difficult.
Mm.
And I believe it is your commitment to the survivors movement that and I don't know, maybe it's just who you are, probably who you are, but you have you have experience with difficult conversations, and so you can bring a level of presence that I have not experienced as often as I would like to.
Mm. Oh, wow. Thank you so much for saying that. Like, I really, um, I don't even have words for how that makes me feel inside. And I want to continue doing the work. And it is a great hope for me that I can be a safe or safer place for people of color. Um, and you have definitely contributed to my knowledge of how to do that better. And I'm going to continue to learn and grow. And also in this moment, I'm going to take that compliment in and say, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you. Mm. Well, one thing we've been talking about in the last couple of episodes is the 10 R's. And you've been talking about all of these important pieces. Last time it was about reparations, and I found that conversation so enlightening. I had never thought of reparations in that same way before, and I hope the survivor community, if you are listening and you haven't listened to that one, go back and listen because there's a lot of connections between reparations for people of color and particularly African American people. And the connection between what it's like for a survivor to want and deserve to have justice and some kind of compensation for what they've experienced. So that was a really powerful one. And we've also kind of mentioned a little bit moving forward about speaking about remorse and reverence. And I'd love to maybe focus our conversation there a little bit today. And we solicited some questions from our community, and we have three beautiful questions that we're going to talk about today. And I'm so excited about that. Before we get into the community questions, maybe you can talk about the next R's, the remorse and reverence, a little bit.
So these are, I believe, my favorite R's of all 10 of the R's. Well, I don't know. Reparations would be pretty dope. I think that one might be my favorite in experience.
Right.
Well, in prolonged experience. But so reverence is something that because of my own, I did not have a personal experience of reverence until this year.
Mm,
Well, I had my spiritual awakening, and there is reverence for that, but I did not have conscious awareness even to have reverence for that because I understood that there was no right or wrong. So
right.
everything was transactional and based on these like this comparison thinking that I didn't recognize as comparison thinking.
Yeah.
Um, and then through my own journey of trauma healing while also acknowledging that my own personal divinity and sovereignty and divine right to choose and divine choice and impact of that. Um, it started out as appreciation for the difficulty of the journey
Mm,
in healing really tough harms. But then, if you've had a life where everything keeps coming at you, and then you get to a prolonged place of stability, looking back is not something you want to do. But then your relationships and life and stuff like that suffer, so you kind of like look back. Hopefully, if you say I want to do something different,
right.
or be someone different, and then you have to do that work. And I've been doing that work for 5 years, and so it's 5 years of unpacking all the effects of it and acknowledging things that happened and all that. And it is incredibly difficult to do it and still remain in touch with who you know yourself to be.
Yeah.
And that part to me, there's a reverence for the fact that you can do it and not project those, if you can do it and not project those feelings. And I want to be very clear. I'm not shaming anyone in their journey who is at a place where they can't do that. Their feelings are infinite, and I have an infinite number of feelings myself. So there are feelings I have not been able to not project when I have them. So I'm not, that's a human process. But humans that can hold that kind of pain and presence, or hold that kind of to transmute it, to process it, to choose, to see their I hate when I have to use this because I know the many ways it can be interpreted, but to see their divine choice even in that pain.
Mm,
And I want to be clear, it's always a co-creation. There's infinite many ways, and co-creating it that way is still some bullshit. So I'm not one of those like, oh, the trauma is the only method. It was a bunch of methods, and
right.
this is the one that all these divine beings created. So like, let's do better. But but being able to see that co-created choice and
Mm,
see like, oh, so of the choices I knew I was making, I participated here.
mm,
Or I reacted in this way. I didn't respond. I
mm,
didn't have presence in this moment. I shut down for my own protection and survival.
right.
Very fine coping mechanisms for human evolution.
Yeah.
Some stuff you go through, you need to do that. That's the brain's defense mechanism. It protects you. But it does when you slow down and you process, you do need to metabolize that
Mm,
trauma that's stored in your body. So I have reverence for that whole process. And then I had to experience something I did that I felt ashamed of.
mm,
And I had to reclaim my own shame from someone I put some in. And then I listened to the impact of that. And I had to be present in that and recognize that for me and my body systems, that energy. whether it's reverence or remorse, my body itself
Mm.
responds the same, which is love and awe, but the desire to create an impact. And so I had to take your impact. I offer my own restitution. Um, but it was a weird thing because I heard problems that were expressed and new solutions in my network that I could to like bring to the table, and so I chose to do that because I wanted to help remedy. It was like a intrinsic desire. So yes, this is self-centered, but through my own adult conscious experience of those emotions, like remorse gave me a value for humanity I didn't fully have yet, but
Mm.
it was because I hadn't fully felt value for my own humanity.
Right. Right.
So and I believe there are many people that are also lacking that experience because of our hyper individualistic society.
Mm-hmm.
I also recognize that racism is cognitive dissonance, especially overt racism. To
Mm-hmm.
be able to traffic a human, you are definitely in touch with parts of your humanity that are not beneficial for evolution.
Right.
Um, and that's a journey of change. And so we have a planet that are full of humans.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe if we can create those experiences of reverence, remorse would follow if the person has any sense of empathy, and empathy is something that is taught.
Mm.
So in that regard, it makes me feel hopeful that there can be genuine change after a person experiences that emotion because
Mm.
of my own personal genuine change and desire to make restitution.
Mm.
Ideally, I said this on the show and I'll say it, I believe it. Changing white hearts and minds is what's necessary for it to be peaceful, not what's necessary for the change to happen, for a change to happen. So if you do the work to experience that, you are adding more peace to the world. It's your own soul work. It's your own decision to make a different world, to be the change you want to see, to create a world where your children don't have to experience racism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's whether you're the perpetrator or the victim or both, because you can be both at the same time.
Yeah, that makes sense. So
So, yeah.
let me kind of recap what I think I'm hearing you say because this is all so good, and I'm just kind of trying to wrap my mind around it. So kind of when you're looking at reverence and remorse together, like on maybe the victim side of things, whether that is victim of abuse, whether that is victim of racism, which we've talked about is a form of abuse. It is definitely abuse. We can sometimes um, be able to look back on experiences and maybe feel some guilt or shame about a part we perceive that we played in there or that we did play in that was just maybe our natural body's response to the trauma. And so I know a lot of times victims of domestic violence are like, well, I didn't leave as soon as I should, so I feel like it's my fault that I got abused, and those types of things. And when we can begin to look at that, and we can understand and know that whether it is somebody whose body shuts down, they get in the freeze response in a domestic violence situation or sexual assault situation, in a racist abuse situation, first of all, understanding that that's a normal bodily response, but then also being able to, I don't even like to use this word a lot because a lot of times in the survivor community, it's a very touchy word, but almost forgive ourselves in the sense of like releasing our shame over what we perceive we could have done better in the moment, and that is really a path to healing. And kind of in our conscious, like logical mind, we could be like, well, that was the fight, flight, freeze response happening, but then sort of sometimes like deeper inside we still feel like we were at fault, and being able to kind of like release that. And then also on the other side, where if somebody was a perpetrator of racism, perpetrator of sexual violence or domestic violence, and you can be in both categories. You can, sometimes be a victim and a perpetrator, and that's gets really messy. It's not always clear cut, but a way that we can heal ourselves and heal the world in a racism situation or an abuse situation is first by feeling that remorse. And the way you feel remorse is because of the reverence that you have for human life and realizing I inflicted this upon somebody. And that's really the first step to healing yourself, healing, potentially a relationship, or at least the way you're impacting people moving forward. And um, I see a lot of people who choose not to go through that step of remorse for things that they have done and ways that they have caused pain on others. And they're not taking that reverence path of like, oh, wow, I really inflicted something on someone else that was painful. I need to reckon with that inside of me so I cannot continue that practice. Yeah.
That just so y'all, so I believe that when people don't take on that remorse and skip that step, it's very difficult not to fall into a world where you project your feelings onto others more often than not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because that energy is still inside of you. And if the energy is still a part of the mind consciousness as the subconscious mind, it's still manifesting your reality to you. So you'll still have opportunities to contend with that because your body wants to rid itself of it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do, and I give this analogy about remorse. Like, so reverence is like the water of life,
Mm-hmm.
and remorse is, I will say this, the type of remorse I experience there's no punitive consequences to me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not about to go to jail or
Right.
face those kind of things. But remorse tastes like hot dog water.
Yeah.
Nobody just signs up to drink the water out of the bin that the hot dogs were boiled in. But
Right.
people will eat a boiled hot dog. You
Yeah.
take me to a carnival, and now that I don't eat pork or beef, or it's hard not to get a hot dog, but I miss them. I would eat boiled hot dog. I ate many boiled hot dogs,
Mm-hmm.
and you put some chili and cheese, onions and mustard. It's delicious. But I'm
Yes.
still not drinking the water.
Right.
But it's nutrients in the water, like it's nutrients in chicken broth.
Mm-hmm.
It's just hot dog nutrients. It's the nutrients of the scraps. It's the nutrients of what was ground up. And, ugh.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so it is. If you were itching to survive, you
Yeah.
would drink that hot dog water in the middle of a desert and think
Mm-hmm.
it was the water of life
Right. Right.
because it does still have nutrients in it. It does still have impact. It
Mm-hmm.
does matter. It matters to the victim. It matters to humanity. If
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to be that anymore, which is likely why you don't want to do the step of feeling the remorse, you're
Mm-hmm.
going to keep being that.
Right.
You got to acknowledge it to do it. You can't change what you don't acknowledge. Shout out to Dr. Phil.
Yeah. 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 Wow. Wow. Thank you for that. I think that's super insightful. And so, what I'm taking from that is maybe like some next steps for people who um, have perpetrated harm on others through racist acts, words, all those kinds of things. That before we can be different, we must reckon with what we have done and how we've impacted others. We need to reverence that person and feel remorse before we can create change in ourselves. We need to recognize. Is that right?
That it is accurate, but with the exception of the before.
Mm.
So there are many steps and stages and the
Mm.
ways that we unpack, and many feelings and consciousness that you go through. So
Right.
I can't say that it's a part of it's a very necessary part of the journey,
Yeah.
and it doesn't is not the only part of the journey, right?
Right.
Like, so there are steps leading up to your ability to feel remorse. Like, you
Yeah.
have to develop, like, create a space for a certain amount of reverence to happen.
Right.
Um, and so I just don't want to say it's a before, but it is how do I put, it is very, necessary to me for the fullness thereof.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes
It
sense.
may it takes it and brings it in a
Mm,
way that is transformative to where like so I don't have this in experience, but it's my hypothesis that you will behave differently because of that experience without the need for training. Like,
hmm.
let me change that. Your intentions will change,
Right.
conscious and unconscious alike,
Mm, yeah.
and it'll deepen your ability to become self-aware.
Right. It's really developing that empathy piece. Like you said, that's something you have to learn. It's not necessarily just a natural thing. And when you develop that empathy for the other person, then that does change how you subconsciously think about them, how you consciously think about them, and then also how you act and make choices. Doesn't mean you'll always get it right, but you'll at least be coming from an intention of empathy once you've kind of put put that into your system. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Cool. Are there any other things that you want to say on this topic?
No, no, no. Let's get into the questions.
Okay. Well, this is super, super good. And I'm really enjoying going through all these R's with you. It's every time I learn something new, I see something from a new perspective. So I appreciate that. Um, so we have three questions for this week. And one of them is these are all from anonymous people. And just for everybody who's listening, you can continue to submit questions and you can do it anonymously. And Alexis has said in the past how, nothing's too stupid to ask. If you want to know and you're coming from a place of like I really want to learn, we want your questions. Yes, this is a really amazing thing I think that we're offering at Courage 365 because there's not a lot of spaces where you can just feel like you can ask questions around this, and Alexis has been so
And
kind.
you shouldn't just feel like you should ask questions everywhere.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. But this is a place where you can, and we're welcoming that. So please, please do. Because we have a few more of these episodes coming up with Alexis. So the first question is what websites and, if possible, other resources would you recommend, especially for white anti racists?
So I want to be very clear. Anti-racism work is soul work. So it is a lifestyle that you are adopting,
Mm,
and you should go into it with that intention. And if you
yeah.
don't feel like you can go into it with that intention, you should begin to read books and things and expose yourself um, to see if that, like with the knowledge, if that's your true intention still.
Mm,
I also want to be very clear. I do think that is 100% necessary to hire someone of color. I'm sorry, a person of global majority to teach you about that experience, to teach you how to synthesize that data and know how to empathize properly because it is a tough subject. There's many opportunities for miscommunications to happen. And since it's a tough subject and miscommunications can happen, those lessons can come tough on either side, either party. But with that being said, I have a number of books in front of me that I recommend for people to um, begin to read if that's how you want to do it. So this
can I
is just to
check
give you
something real
context.
quick?
Sure. Hmm.
Um, Another thing that I would add to what Alexis is saying, which is all really, really good, is um, pay attention to how she said hiring somebody to educate you. Um, you shouldn't just be asking your African American friends to just tell you all of these things. That's rude. That's not
Even, and
polite.
I'm gonna tell you this: even if they tell you you can, they may be. It is my opinion, so everybody has a sovereignty. But what I have found, and it's my because I'm trauma informed and trauma experienced, I believe that it's a curiosity with a sense to control or to know how to
Mm-hmm.
arm oneself. So I don't think that it is healthy for those conversations to happen without facilitation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So even if they tell you you can't, Google is the oracle. Read like all of these, like Google it. Whatever your question is also not too stupid for Google, and
Mhm.
you can get many perspectives.
Yeah.
And that'll get us into another one of the questions. But I want to show you
Right.
all the books that
Yes.
and this is not my whole list, nor
Mm-hmm.
my whole library. This is doesn't include my Audible library. I couldn't find a few of my books. Um,
Whoa. Oh my gosh, guys, look at all those good books. Ah, we are totally
and
going to
they're
make
not all
lists for you all because you're not going to be able to remember them all.
not at all, but they're not all on racism.
Okay.
So I recommend this book called The Bond by Lynn McTaggart, and it's how to fix your falling down world. I read this book several years ago, but well, let me say this. The way that I read books is I start them and I read until my interest is satisfied, and then they go on my bookshelf until the next time I need to reference them. But it talks about survival of the most unified and how survival of the fittest is actually a myth and an evolutionary misconcept. And then it gives tools and strategies for how to adopt this unified thinking for the world, how to change your brain waves, how to change your brain chemistry, and different ways to strengthen your intuition and gut hunches. And so I know we believe in that here at the
Mm-hmm.
Courage 365. So I'm gonna recommend if you are white to start with this
Okay.
because it's going to prepare you, it'll condition you to become ready to receive the stuff. But it
And
has work in it. Hmm.
I am just looking at, yeah, I actually follow a podcast that she does called Living the New Science. And I've really, really enjoyed that. So I'm super excited to hear about this book being on your list. That's yay, yay.
I'm excited to know she has a podcast. I'm going to ask you about that after we get off. But so, like, it has work. So, seeing the whole. Step one, noticing more detail. Step two, study your own thinking process. Step three, seeing the unseen. These are skills you need. Strengthening your gut hunches, seeking out the new, seeing the whole truth,
Mm,
relating in wholeness. So, if you're determined to be a self-study, please don't skip any of these books and do all of the work in them. Expect it to be. One of my clients when I was doing her husband was when she was in my course, she said it's like a part-time job because there was a lot of work, and it was like, well, what did you expect for 400 years and 10 weeks?
right, exactly.
um, so then I would suggest oppression in the body, roots,
Mm,
resistance, and resources. This is once again not only about race, it's many levels of marginalized identity oppression and how they get stored in the body, and it'll help you develop empathy. From there, I would have you take a break on all of those reactions happening in your body so tough and get you some intellectual learning, which is This is the Sum of Us by Heather McGee. What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. This book has received pushback because it has started to have white people call themselves oppressed, and that is difficult for anybody else to hear because you stir the least oppressed. So there is that.
right.
And it's reason you will benefit from eradicating oppression. But that's hot dog water to like
Yeah.
drink too for people who are not white. But one of the main examples that I've seen in the advertising for this is that there was a city, I want to say it's Alabama, but I'm not, so it could have been Ohio. I'm bad at that. Where they were ordered to desegregate the pool, the city public pool, and they drained the pool rather than desegregate it. And that cost that community the public pool.
Hmm.
Many children's play, many children, so there is it documents lots of ways that racism has cost the benefit of society as a whole.
Right, right.
Um, if you are a person that maybe needs some like storytelling with your understanding, I would suggest, although this one got some controversy too,
Mm,
but this is so you want to talk about race, Ijeoma Olu. Um, I enjoyed the stories in this book because I could identify with them, and
right.
so they get it's like there's a lot of truth in the way the microaggression is interpreted. I would suggest this because sometimes how we speculate an impact would be on a person is very different, especially if
Mm,
you have some history of like studying psychology or something like that, and you don't have the lived experience.
hmm
For example, there was I got consulted on a situation where a person witnessed racism at their neighborhood grocery store, and then they began to tell me what the black woman who was experiencing racism wanted when they asked for the manager, and the person said they were the manager. And it was like she wanted some help from a higher source and all of that. I
mm,
said, no, she didn't. She wanted to punish him because he was racist, and she was
hmm
disappointed because he said he's the manager. But it's
Right.
like these projections of this
Yeah.
higher, because you want to, it was, I found him to be trying to validate himself because he was
hmm
feeling like he should have done more.
Right.
Um, so like our own lens will color the way we interpret.
hmm
And so because white people don't have to think about race in our society, you have to accept that you're just not like don't feel equipped to think about
hmm
it on your own
Right.
because you're if you think about it in terms of having to do it, you're a kindergartner if you've
hmm
never had to do it.
Right.
And if you've been putting practice in it, you can give yourself credit for further stages of growth, but recognize it's not something that your brain has habituated yet.
Right.
So when you be like, oh, I feel like that or I feel like this, don't see yourself like all feelings are valid, but they are definitely not facts.
Right. Right. Yeah. That makes sense. So, are you kind of saying like a lot of times white people over intellectualize things and kind of try to diagnose versus like because they haven't lived that experience actually knowing what it feels like instead of kind of try to come above and look at it almost like an outside psychologist, like putting together all the pieces,
Yes.
that kind of like that versus like sinking in and feeling what it feels like because haven't experienced it.
Yes, that and I'm talking about and I want to say this, not white people in all contexts of all things, but white people in my experience in the context of dealing with matters of race.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not painting a broad brush to say
Right.
all white people do this all the time. But in
Sure.
my
Sure.
experience, that is and these because they're tough feelings to deal with. So your brain might tell you to disassociate and intellectualize. Like,
Right.
but you have to be able to recognize that that's what your brain's telling you.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then this one is my favorite. This is My Grandmother's Hands by
Ooh,
Resma Minicum.
yes. Yes. I have that downloaded, and that is my next book.
It it talks about racialized trauma and the pathway to mending our hearts and bodies.
Mm-hmm.
But he talks about the intergenerational aspect of it and how police bodies, because the police system in U.S. America was
Mm-hmm.
established as the runaway slave patrol.
Right.
So there is somatic and epigenetic bias
Mm,
programmed in, and if you think about it, police families often will have lineages of
mm,
people who are on the force,
right.
and so those that that's that evolutionary track and however it plays out. And he taught, but in this book, there are also exercises to metabolize and process or
Mm,
become aware of where it exists in you.
got it.
And so he even tells you, don't read this book if you're not going to do the activities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Take the time when it tell if I listen to it, take the time to pause and do the exercise as he guides you through it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not one you get to just intellectualize and feel like you got it because you do not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I have not read these, but they were gifted to me, or I had them in my cart. So, The Inner Work of Racial Justice by Rhonda V. McGee, Healing
Okay.
Ourselves and Transforming Our Communities Through Mindfulness. I am going to read it. When I read it, the description, it seemed really good. Like I like the way that it linked the mindfulness to the inner work of racial justice.
Mm-hmm.
And then after all of that, you really do need some counter narratives about Black people if you really are going to have the reverence that is appropriate. So there is Vanguard, how Black women broke barriers, won the vote, and insisted on equality for all.
Mm,
And The Bridge Called My Back, writings by radical women of color.
nice.
Um, and there are many others, right? Find out, teach yourself about Black history. It is American history and Black resilience. We talked about what's necessary on the first
Mhm.
R to be resilient. Find reverence for that.
Yeah.
When you see the one of the things that's talked about in Resma Minicum's book, My Grandmother's Hands, is that Black people are programmed for white comfort
Hmm.
somatically because when
Hmm.
white people get uncomfortable, bad consequences happen through
Yeah.
the projection.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, see that, see, dang it, I lost the point I was making. Oh, have reverence for that ability to make to fawn. If you're an abuse survivor,
Hmm.
you and fawn was a way you had to navigate being around your abuser.
Right.
You know how difficult it is to have that level of rage or disgust in you
Hmm.
and still participate in normal society and other dynamics.
Right.
Have reverence for the ability for that ability to be done, like for it to be done from white people to, I mean, Black people to white people.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
So
Hmm.
that's my list
Like
of
that.
books. Power, Privilege, and Dominance. I cannot
Yes.
remember who the author is, but it is a textbook and it talks about what happens when a society is governed based on power, privilege, and dominance and how those dynamics play out.
Mm, really, really good. Thank you for kind of giving us a an overview of each of the books too, because if you just given us a list, I think I don't know, you just sort of brought them to life, and I think piquing people's interest that way is really helpful. But we will also, everybody who's listening, create a list with like some links and stuff so you can buy it. Um, but if any of these are piquing your interest, maybe just go and search for that one right away as we're coming out with this list. We've got two more questions. I'm going to do them a little bit out of order just because I think that this is kind of in line with what you just talked about. But the next question I want to ask is, what are resources for children to help them better understand racial equality?
So, I sent Ashley some resources and a website that helps explain the Black Lives Matter movement in child language. And I sent her an article. The I am not a parental anti, like I'm not a consultant for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I also am not a parent, so just like to get when I'm answering questions about this, I like to give that context because sometimes I struggle not personally with translating things into child language.
Sure.
Um, and I expect children to intellectualize more than they do.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave those, they'll be in the comments. But remember, you need the sooner you begin talking to your children about
Mm-hmm.
race,
Yeah.
the easier it will be for them to understand intrinsically. So you
Right.
can age appropriately, start as early as like 5 when
Mm-hmm.
children start saying, "Oh, they're brown and you're not." And it's like, "Well, what do you think about that?"
Mm-hmm.
And see what they think. Just have a conversation that doesn't necessarily inform them that like, "Oh, so you see those differences. Do you think what do you like about that?"
Mm-hmm.
If you hear a child say, "Oh, you're ugly," because she's not
Mm-hmm.
ugly, she's just different.
Mm-hmm.
And you give don't be afraid to talk about it the same way. If you want to teach children about safe touch, you have to
Mm-hmm.
talk to them about touch and
Mm-hmm.
not just tell them to avoid all touch.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk to them about race so that they know safe ways to approach it, things to say, like it's a part of manners, it's a part
Mm-hmm.
of empathy and teaching children how to behave.
Yeah.
Then mhm.
No, I was just agreeing. Yeah.
Oh, then there another thing you can do is to expose your children to children of other races and other
Mm-hmm.
cultures. because it benefits. There's no world where they exist that it does that other cultures and other races aren't there. So when you do that and you give your child social skills amongst multiple races, you're actually arming them with more skills for success,
Mm,
um, and not just control and replication.
right. Yeah, and the link that you sent me, um, there was one I checked it out and it's so cool, guys. I just want to make sure I'm saying the name of it
I
right.
think it's
It was
brain bop.
Yes, it was Brain Bop, and we'll make sure to include this in the resource list as well. But I loved it so much. I went through one of the little videos. It's like a cartoon, and it's really educational. It even interested me as an adult, just the way it laid it out. It was super like simple to understand, but it broke it down so there was like a little 8-minute video, and then there was a quiz the kids could take afterwards. It has like a little robot that kind of smiles when you get answers right and stuff. And then you could actually use it in schooling. So whether you homeschool or you want to use this in addition to your child going to public or private school, there's like vocabulary words that they can learn under there. And I think there's even like a game that they can play. And so I loved how it was like full sensory, and children love, the iPad. And so what if one of the games that they played was being able to listen to a story, play a game, learn some vocabulary words, and take a little quiz? I mean, I enjoyed it, and I think I'm probably going to take some more of those little quizzes. I got, I think, 8 out of 10 right, and I was like, ooh, this is for children. I need to need to listen to that story again. But it was good. And so, yeah, highly recommend that. And I really loved just the presentation of it being sort of like cartoon characters and like a cute little robot and everything. And so it was good. It was good.
I've watched a couple of the videos and I enjoyed the way that they explain it. And
Uh
it
huh.
doesn't feel too like, so one of the things that's often makes it difficult is because race is a painful subject to talk about, parents kind of want to avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I watched through the videos, it didn't make it, it wasn't as painful
Mm-hmm.
for children to understand. One of
Yeah.
the things that this I just want to tell this brief story. I took my niece to her mother and myself. We took her to the Charles H. Wright Museum, like African American Museum, and they have an exhibit that takes you through the transatlantic slave trade, like
Mm-hmm.
before it,
Yeah.
and it's like with wax figures, and you're in the belly of the boat with people
Mm-hmm.
there. And one of the things she became overwhelmed with emotion. She began to cry, and she said, "Why
Right.
were they so horrible to us?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was so like I regretted
Mm-hmm.
a little bit
Mm-hmm.
taking her.
Right.
But at the same time, I also had to explain that that was history and this is we
Mhm.
learn so we don't repeat it. Teach
Right.
her how to manage her little emotion, but it was,
Yeah.
whew,
Right.
um,
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense because people need to learn the history, but also probably a 5-year-old, there's a limit to what is healthy to bring to their awareness when they can't, manage their emotions. And I did like how this was, it told facts, but it wasn't too graphic. And I think it would be easier for, a child to process. Um, and yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that one. That's really good. Yeah.
she's 9. Well, she'll be 9 next month.
Mm.
So she's not 5. Like she's
Right.
understanding concepts, and we've been talking about it because it's
Sure.
what I do and it's in the news,
Yeah.
and making sure she knows her history
Yeah.
proudly. And one of the things I do like is they show afterwards and Reconstruction
Right.
and Motown, all the
Yeah.
contributions also.
That's
So,
cool.
but it was really difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the last question I want to talk about is from someone who says, how can I start to realize when I'm being triggered by a person of color based on my own biases before I react poorly? I think this kind of gets into a little bit of what you were talking about earlier about that empathy and reverence and all those things. But what I'm getting from this question is, they've noticed that sometimes there's that trigger response, and sometimes it feels like it's out of control, and it's like, oh wow, I already said something, and then maybe there's the remorse after, and would prefer to not do the thing that has the remorse and harm for others.
So that work is work you need to do whether you are doing it around racism or not, because you should not be reacting. You should be well, it's more bit. I don't want to. I'm not. I don't want to should all over everyone. But so
Sure.
please, when I say should, ideally is what I mean.
Right.
If you hear me
Right.
say should, you shouldn't be reacting. You should be responding.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, but my question to the person asking is, do you know what biases you hold?
Yeah.
Because if you don't know what biases you hold, you will not be able to do anything
Right.
before you react, because you won't recognize it ticking itself up, and you won't be able to see it until its impact.
Right.
Um, Especially if that bias is in, if it's in you, when you get ticked up, it's very likely for that to happen.
Yeah.
When if you become emotionally flooded, lots of emotions come out when people are emotionally flooded, and the words and thoughts that match them are very ugly
Right.
often. You have to do the work to rid yourself of those biases, which is
Mm-hmm.
why, once again, I suggest hiring someone. But also, you can do debiasing strategies. You need to go and people watch and tell yourself
Mm-hmm.
positive stories. Read, consume content of counter images.
Yeah.
Find counter facts to what biases you hold. But you
Mm-hmm.
have to get to know yourself and how you react
Mm-hmm.
in order to develop the level of self awareness to prevent yourself from doing it.
Right.
Um, it's not an easy fix, but it is very much worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also like to say it's easier if you remind yourself that this is societal programming, just
Mm.
like, and just as marketing works.
Yeah.
And you sometimes will hear jingles in your head that are commercials because
Yeah.
it was repeated, whether
Yeah.
it's your values or not.
Mm-hmm.
You can pay attention to what biases you hold that float around in your mind, whether they're your espoused values or not. And then you have to do the work to understand why
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
have that and
Yeah.
heal that why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, yeah, that's a really good response. It reminds me, I've been through some different mindset courses, and it was around the topic of money and limiting beliefs around money. And one of the exercises was, identifying the limiting belief of like, nobody in my position can make this much money. And when you identify that limiting belief, then going out and like Googling like people in a very similar position who have made the kind of money you want to make, and then being like, oh, okay, this is actually possible. And then that kind of destroys the limiting belief. And it sounds like you're saying something very similar with when you can identify that, okay, I have this stereotype about this person or this people group or this individual. Let me go and see if there's been any exceptions to this rule, and let me find another one and another one, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, no more does this have to be a stereotype, that I believe, because I can see it's obviously not accurate across the board, and so I should probably give people the benefit of the doubt that they're not actually that way.
Yes, and yeah, very, and it will also tell you your biases as you are
Mm,
discover, like as you start exposing yourself to the information, those biases gonna come up.
mm-hmm.
Pay it when you read these books, the biases will come up.
Yeah.
When you catch yourself saying, I feel like that's not accurate, that's a bias.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you feel like it's not accurate without having a why,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll say this, and you decide that that's not true. So it's
Right.
one thing to have a suspicion.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you have that suspicion and you do further research and you discover with evidence that it's not true, then that has more validity. Although make sure it's qualified evidence.
Right.
Um, and then if you discover like, oh, I feel like that's not accurate, and when you do the research, you discover that it was. Feelings once again are valid but not facts. You need to see why
Right.
you felt it wasn't accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
what? Because sometimes the thing that dismisses, like your feeling that tells you that's not true, is
Right.
enough evidence for our day-to-day life, but
Yeah.
it's not enough evidence for race to make your mind aware of race when you have not been.
Right. Right. Now,
You
this
don't
is
have qualified feelings.
right. Right. And this kind of brings something up for me. I've seen a lot of people who, they claim to be anti-racist and like they say that they're doing this work, and then they almost go to the other end of things and they like believe anything that's told to them from more of a quote unquote progressive platform, and they also don't fact check things. And that seems like bypassing doing the work as well. So you can have a bias and then just automatically believe that, or you can change and be like, well, anything I hear from these sources, which I view as quote unquote anti racist, I'm just going to automatically believe that this story or whatever is true. And it seems like solving the problem for both of those ends is like fact checking, like fact checking, like you said, from qualified sources.
And I'm gonna say this: find you a cause and a purpose, and just commit to that.
Yeah,
Right? Like so, focusing on the problem does not necessarily create the solution.
right,
It for sure doesn't implement the solutions.
right.
So some of this stuff, if you go get active and active in a way that acknowledges your ineptitude to, you would be ground level, and
Hmm.
and you're going to have all kind of human reactions to being at ground level as an
Right,
adult.
right.
Them feelings gonna come up, like who are you
Yeah.
to tell me, and da da da. Well, but when you look at the evidence for that, who are you to tell me? That's your ego, right? Like, so, but get out there and do it, right? Do find a cause, commit some money, commit some effort, commit someone else's effort. Get your friend to go, get someone from the household to go, call it the household contribution.
Hmm.
But whatever you do, don't do nothing, and
Yeah,
definitely don't do anything. Don't only argue
yeah,
or be contrary just to be contrary.
yeah, yeah. That makes sense.
And and if you speak from your own experience
Hmm.
and your own knowledge, no one can refute your own experience. They can tell you
Right.
it's anecdotal. They could tell you, but you can understand that it's one experience in the context
Hmm.
of many,
Yeah.
but you got to have some to have any understanding about it.
Right. It gives you more data points that sit better or stronger in your memory than just reading about something.
Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
that that part. That's what I'm trying to emphasize and finding way too many words for it.
No, no, it was good. It was good. That's just how my brain processed it, and yeah. Wow. Well, hey, Alexis, this has been awesome as always. I know we talk about this every time, but in case somebody's just hopping on this series for the first time, like tell everybody where they can find you and your work, your YouTube channel, all the things.
So I am Ask Alex. No, I'm Alexis Douglas on Facebook, and Ask Alexis is my business name on all other platforms, including Facebook. You can email me at askalexis at gmail, askalexis111 at gmail.com. And you can find out about me on my website at askalexis111.com. Um, I am, though, to give the audience, I'm in a bit of a few months of a break period where I'm focusing on some interpersonal, like some of my own personal work and
Yeah.
some family building. I am making content about that, but I am not releasing the content around that yet. So know that I am definitely working to create and working to create things of impact, but I'm open for all questions. I'm open for all contact, but I am it would have to come at a very steep it would be an offer I couldn't refuse that would make me do some work on other things right now.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. But you do have a YouTube channel that you have some great videos that you've done before, and everybody, you should just follow her on social media. You totally
Oh
should.
yes, and my YouTube. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Yes, that is Ask Alexis 111 also. And yes, there's tons of videos on there and tons of content and interviews and panels and previous Courage 365 interviews on there.
Oh, yes. Yes. Awesome. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you again for your time. We are so appreciative of what you are offering our community. I learned something new every time we speak. And we cannot wait till next month when we hear from you again. So I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you so, so much. And for everybody else, make sure that you follow us on all of our social media channels. So we've got YouTube, we've got Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all the places. And we just started a podcast, so we're uploading all of our episodes there. So if you prefer to listen to our episodes in audio form, maybe while you're driving, exercising, whatever, and don't want to have the video in front of you, we have put those into the podcast format. You can find them wherever you get your podcasts. They're on all the major platforms. And we would love for you to leave us a review. That would help us move up in our rankings so more people can see this amazing content. Be sure to share this video too. Just go ahead and click share and let your friends see this, because you and I both know if you're listening to this, you care about this topic and you're going to want to spread this around so other people can have this education as well. Then feel free to pop on over to our website, which is courage365.org, and you can get our free ebook, 5 Keys to Living a Life of Courage, just for visiting the page. It can help you take your next most courageous steps as a survivor. And if you are in a situation where you need help, click our Need Help tab. And of course, if you are in imminent danger, if you know or suspect child abuse, contact the authorities. But for other things, go ahead and look at that Need Help tab, because we have hotlines, we've got resources, supportive blogs and websites, all the things to help you connect with the survivor community. Thank you all so much for being with us tonight, and live with courage.